Start up in about or now. Okay, great, excellent. Welcome everybody to the Climate Solutions Caucus bi-monthly, every other week meeting, February 22nd. For today's agenda, we are going to give a preview of the bill tracker that a couple of our interns from UVM have been working on and developing for several weeks. It's taken many, many, many hours. Writ large, first, it's a work in progress. The point of the tracker is to be useful. So it would be really wonderful if, as you guys look at it, you can think about, how might I, how might I use this within my committee, or to get a sense of what's going on in other committees, ideas of how to make it something practical and tangible that can help us. Two other pieces about the tracker. You'll see that there are some columns to the far right related to how it scores via equity lens, like how a particular bill scores via equity lens. There has been some good work on that by Rep. Logan and others. And we will have an update for you on it, but we're not quite ready for it yet, but we will. And there is also another tracker that we are not going to talk through today, but and I will not ask Rep. Williams to talk about it right now since he's mid-chew. But essentially, that bill tracker tracks all of the, flooding mitigation related bills. So one piece we could, the only reason why we're not sharing it is because we didn't give him warning that, hey, can we upload it and get it up on the screen? So it's more a process thing. But that is, definitely, flooding is most definitely related to the work of this committee. So we can share that out with you via email. And so this can be an ongoing iterative process where today we start with the initial draft, and then you guys can look at the flooding piece, the flooding tracker, and we can think about how to use those moving forward. I do want to, so tracker is the first agenda item. Next agenda item is, I don't know if all the House reps have noticed, but we are graced by many senators today. Yay. Thank you. This is so that House reps know what the Senate is working on and what we're hoping to see from them come over to us. So we have a little sneak preview with full recognition that things will change. So Senator White is going to be teeing up that part of the conversation. And then third, if we have time, we can talk about other items, but that's sort of the overarching gist for today's agenda. I do want to nod that Rep. Burke's intern, who comes on Wednesdays, not on Thursdays, Evelyn Seidner, spent many hours on this tracker. And so just thank you, Evelyn, even though you're not here. And with that, my intern, B. Wilson, who also worked with Evelyn on this, is actually going to walk you through what the tracker looks like once Jordan is able to pull it up. So B, come on up. This is B. Wilson in your last year?
Second to last.
Second to last year. Wow, okay. This is, any chance we can enlarge this?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
There's a lot of bills, folks.
Do you want to go stand up there?
Yes, I'll go
That way. Yeah.
And you can all see this yourselves on your devices at your own convenience.
I'm going to share out the links to both trackers right after this meeting. Thank you.
Rep. Rice will share the links to both trackers right after this meeting. Thank you.
Hi, I'm B. No need to clap. So we basically just tried to condense the bill tracker that was already made by previous interns in order to make something that is not that difficult to use and can be added to pretty easily going forward by anyone who has 2 minutes to throw a bill in there. We have topic area, which there's a lot of community resilience, AKA flooding. Basically, we have some energy stuff, waste, land related. body committee, most of it's House E&E, but there's some Senate, Ag, other things. Bill number, summary, all the usual. We have the leads. Yeah, I'll just keep going over. This is all stuff you can find on the website. We have a demo for the just transition, which is the equity thing that we were talking about, which is I believe Act 154 or 153. Don't quote me on that. Introduced the idea of a equity tracker for analyzing bills in earlier stages in order to implement basically practices in order to include frontline communities in climate resilience bills. I went through and scored some of them. Just generally, there's only, I think I did like 5 just to put like some idea in there. They range from 21 to 63. And scoring low doesn't necessarily mean that they don't help, just that they don't have a specific mind towards equity in the structure of the bill. So it's just more about like word choice sometimes, verbiage, or like acknowledging which communities are most impacted. But it doesn't necessarily mean that a bill won't help frontline communities. There's also CAP equity standards. We didn't include those because they're more in-depth or in depth, but in the future, we could go back and score everything. We took out the climate action plan, like confirmations that were in previous drafts of the bills, just because we felt it was a lot of work. I don't really understand the climate action plan enough to be able to really rate everything well enough. And there's other people who are much more efficient at it in the state house. And then just notes. Yeah.
So you also have a part where you tell what the status of the bill is. So let's say I was really interested in, let's say, Mark Mahali's bill around dam safety that's in the House. I've followed that bill. I'm not quite sure where it is, but I can find it on here and then I can go, oh, I see where it is in committee. And if I, for example, had insider info that, let's say, that bill got added to S213, I might add a note in there. So if someone else is like, wow, I really hope that bill passes. Oh, wait, I now see it's inside of another bill. I could put that note in there.
Yeah, so we have something like that for 586 in the notes column, because that was added to a Senate bill, I believe.
Yeah, yep.
But yeah, it's mostly just for ease of access to climate resilience and otherwise bills going on, so that the committee has a better idea of like organization and what we get on the floor.
Great. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah.
Comments?
Go ahead.
I'm just, maybe it's possible, but is there any way to get costs, like how much,
Oh, like the fiscal note of each or something?
kind of, or just, approximate? So, because I think we probably would have to prioritize and that would be helpful.
That's a good point. Yeah,
If it's possible.
if there's a fiscal note done on it, you could add to the notes what the fiscal
Yeah,
note.
we could definitely try to include like from the bill, the estimated costs,
Yeah.
like the agencies. That might be a later stage, just
Okay.
because it's requires a little more work,
Yep.
but it's definitely something that can be thought out.
That's a great point.
Can you add a live link in any of these fields?
Oh, yeah, that's easy.
Sure, because for instance, on 213, we've requested a fiscal note, it hasn't been finished yet. But we could put the link in once it is and you can pull up the whole.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea, just to, again, ease of access.
Any other questions? Thank you, Bea and Evelyn.
Thank you.
Hopefully that'll help you with your constituents if they say, I really care about this bill, and you're like, what bill is this and where does it live? You at least know for the climate bills generally where to go. So thank you for our senators who have joined us today. We're going to talk about 3 bills that are in the Senate that you're going to hopefully see on the House side. 2 are related to flood recovery, and then 1 is more of a large, it's the Make Big Oil Pay, although I know Senator Sheem has a preferred terminology for it. So we're going to start with Make Big Oil Pay. Senator Hashim will give us an overview and perhaps tell us kind of what the next steps are briefly. And then we'll have Senator Bray talk about S213, and then Senator Watson and I will talk about S310, which is the government operations bill. So go ahead.
Good, thank you. And I'll get to why I have a other preferred name. I think that'll help in this, but the short version of this bill, if that's possible, is that, this bill would create a state super fund in which parties such as, large oil corporations would be strictly liable if their contributions from what they've manufactured and refined are able to be measured in such a way as to figure out how they have affected climate change in our state. So one of the main things is that this is not and cannot be a punitive bill, because we cannot retroactively impose punitive legislation. And that's part of why I prefer just calling it the Climate Super Fund, because make big oil pay. I do like the sound of it, but when we're in committee and on the floor, and everything that we say can be used in a lawsuit. And I imagine that the last thing any of us wants is having any of our speeches in support of this bill being used in a lawsuit against this bill. So that's that. The question I've often received is about the retroactivity of this. And, while there are some circumstances in which economic liability retroactively have not survived judicial scrutiny, there are also many other circumstances in which they have survived judicial scrutiny. And so that's kind of to say that the question is open for that. A lot of the cases where it has withstood judicial scrutiny fall under CERCLA, which is the US Superfund. So that's helpful. The two main pieces that I'm focusing on compared to the lawsuit that happened in New York, which failed for constitutional reasons, is that we have to make sure that this is focused just on Vermont, because we can't act in such a way that goes beyond our borders. So we have to stay focused on Vermont. And the second piece is that we have to make sure that the formulas that we're using are accurate and scientific. They also can't be arbitrary, capricious, or the other word there. They can't be arbitrary or capricious. And so there is a process in which these methods could be looked at if and when we get sued, which I imagine would be the day after this bill hopefully passes. And the next part I'll touch is, folks have also talked about the cost of litigation versus the cost of paying for climate change. And I mean, it's hard to, off the cuff, imagine how much it's going to cost to continuously repair all of our bridges and, replacing homes that get flooded out, and the many other areas in which climate change causes harm. But the situation that would be created here is that the state would be the defendant, and the basis for which this bill would be looked at, in my opinion and other attorneys' opinions, is called rational basis. And that's, you could consider that like the lowest level of judicial scrutiny, and is often deferential to the state. And then you have intermediate scrutiny and then strict scrutiny. So that's the legal side of the bill. The scientific side of it, I mean, we heard a lot about it today, and I think that there will be one specific section that does a flyby through Senator Bray's committee, the Natural Resources Committee. just to make sure there are multiple eyes on how we're making sure that the scientific process is indeed accurate and rational.
Thank you, Senator Hashim Esquire. It's very obvious you have your law degree. So you just started taking testimony today in Senate Judiciary and how,
We started last week, maybe the week before.
okay,
It all
how,
blends together.
okay, you've got some time to go and do you know do you have a plan for voting it out or when should people be starting to be more aware of the bill? Like when we might see next action?
Well, we're taking testimony, I think, tomorrow,
Okay,
I believe. I'll have to double check that.
Okay.
But, I mean, we have 2 weeks until crossover,
Okay.
so
but this is
I'd like
the,
to see it voted out. I think that it will be voted out, but again, I can't predict the future. I hope that it will be voted out and I'd like it to be voted.
and if we wanted to help support you in your cause to make that happen, what would you recommend?
You could contact members of the Senate Judiciary. Aside from me, I'm gonna vote yes.
We have a question. Go ahead.
Nader, thank you for this.
Yeah.
I really encourage you and the House to go forward with this, just to share a little bit with what we should expect if we pass this and we get sued, because this has happened before when Vermont Yankee nuclear plant was happening. One of the things that may happen is you'll get an email from Ledge Counsel to say that they have requested access to all of our emails. So just don't be surprised and careful about what you put in your emails, because it could be brought, maybe not as big a deal as it sounds like, but question to you, lawyer, newly sworn in lawyer, do each of us risk personal exposure in a situation like this, or as government?
Well, I would say, talk to your attorney, but I think.
That is bad.
we do have-
First thing they learn.
Yes.
So as legislators, we do have sovereign immunity. So my speculation would be no.
Okay, thank you. I saw Kate and then Scott.
The committee path?
Yeah.
It'll be in judiciary and then it should go to.
Oh, like where will it go next? I personally, I would like
Sorry.
part of it to go to Senate Natural Resources because just to put eyes on the scientific process of it, because we have to make sure that the method used to measure all of this, to measure what we're trying to measure here is accurate and not arbitrary. So yes, it probably Senate Natural Resources if they're willing and if the chair of the committee is willing, but, and then from there, I would imagine the floor.
Yeah, well, do you have any, do we need to go to finance or appropriations? I don't know the answer to that question because there's money. Do we need to appropriate money or?
I don't think so.
Okay, then yeah, probably just natural resource and then the floor.
Cool. Because it raised revenue.
Yes, it may go through finance, but
Okay.
it's a good question. Scott, and then we'll move on to S213 unless there's
Yes.
any other.
Great. You heard from the Attorney General, I presume?
No, and we likely, well, I don't want to speak for their office, but I don't think we will because they would be the ones defending this and you know, like I was talking about earlier, anything that they also say in committee could be used. And so no, we haven't heard from them.
Seems to me that it might be good to get guidance from them about, anyway, but I think we did hear from the Attorney General when we were talking about GWSA.
Oh.
So anyway, just.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a priority bill of our caucus. If you're a co-sponsor, thank you for doing that. If you're not a co-sponsor, also perfectly fine. I don't think anyone is not a co-sponsor though. If you're, so thank you, Senator Hashim. And if folks have questions, is it okay for them to come talk to you about it?
So I have a good handout I can slide. folks.
Yes, there's a great handout. And then there's also some advocacy groups that I know this is a priority of theirs. So, if folks need to talk to an advocate or have questions, that we also have those folks. Okay, Senator Bray,
Sure.
what is this S213 Flood Safety Act that I keep hearing about?
Just stand up because it's too exciting.
I'd like to note that another senator has entered.
And we have hit our total, most senators ever. Yeah.
So F 13, known as the Flood Safety Act, just cleared Senate Natural Resources and Energy yesterday in a 5-0-0 vote.
Wow.
We've been working on it since the first week.
Yeah.
And it is addresses a great area of vulnerability for Vermonters, and that is flooding as it relates to river corridors, floodplains, wetlands, and dam. So the Champlain Basin involves 136 towns. It is a vast, huge, organic, natural system. But our way of managing water is piecemeal at the municipal and state level. There's very little regulation for river corridors, the space that the river would be over time expected to live within, the sort of meander zone, some people call it. And then floodplains outside are regulated through municipal laws, flood hazard area bylaws. Those are guided by FEMA maps. The state does maps on river corridors. But we have roughly 80% of towns have FEMA. They have flood hazard area bylaws. Because if you don't have them, you can't qualify for the National Flood Insurance Program. So towns are very motivated to make their citizens eligible for that. But only 10% of towns have river corridor bylaws. And it's river corridors that generate about 80% of the damage in flooding events. So we have this huge exposure and very little regulation. And it's not that I think for the most part people want to regulate, but it is a complicated system. We had a regular heavy dose of science from our state fluvial geomorphologists and more, and learned a lot about it. So the idea is over the next several years, all the way out through 2028, because there's a lot of work to do. We start with first phase is mapping. We need to get the data about what really is in the landscape and get it accurate and up to date. Because there are FEMA maps that are so out of date that the river is not even in the flood hazard area anymore. It's moved that far. So we get the FEMA maps and river corridor maps updated. It's going to involve a lot of work reaching out to municipalities. So be engagement of the agency through municipalities and RPCs to ground truth those maps there, because maps I've come to appreciate in our process are political. It's not just data. In fact, well, that once you have that data and you start using it, then there's some political choices. How are we going to develop? Where are we going to develop? How are we going to manage things? And we know that so many of our towns are already developed naturally enough in river valleys next to rivers. So there's a long-term commitment to managing those long-term relationships better. The mapping phase is followed by a education and outreach phase, so that it's about engaging citizens. We had those, we looked at an EJ score box up there. One of the things we talked about and took testimony on is to make sure that those who are most affected are at the table when we're talking about how those maps are tuned and developed and used. And then that period is followed by rulemaking, so that we'll have laws, rules available to then regulate. So the overall plan is that we update to a higher level for the flood hazard areas, new state standard bylaws for flood hazard areas, for floodplains, that will have a new river corridor rule that regulates the river corridor better. And those two together will bring us into the, I think where we need to be because of the vulnerability of so many Vermonters to these flood events, which we sadly know are becoming frequent and more damaging. So we, got some data from Doug Farnham, who's the executive.
He was our disaster guy. He was like head of the flooding.
Czar of this round of disaster. And, in the end, he said, we'll probably be over $1 billion of damage. A big number. We get numb to numbers around here. We get, but there are hundreds, if not thousands of Vermonters whose lives have been turned upside down. They will never be made whole.
Yep.
There's no program that puts everything back together. And for some people, it becomes a lifelong trauma. You know, when you hear someone say, every time it rains,
Yeah.
they become anxious because they've been flooded out. And so we see the need. We don't have a way of addressing it well now. S213 provides a path forward to addressing it. I'd say we've already received, unfortunately, some pushback from the fifth floor on the bill. which
Shockingly
frankly
enough.
Surprises me. Well, it surprises me that we're talking about safety. And, you know, when we see a need as government and we don't act, then I think we're actually guilty of negligence. We have the opportunity, we have the tools, we have the law, we have the programs, we have the expertise, and we can allocate funds to support that work. So that's what S213 is all about. It's got, there's a lot of work entailed. And, but I think I left out another piece. So
Dam safety.
one of the other ways we're managing water and floods is dam. There are about 1,100 dams in the state of Vermont. Some are in good condition, highly maintained, inspected regularly. Those tend to be the hydro dams, which are highly regulated. But there are, there are 1,100 dams. Some are in poor shape. They're all classified. So we asked the Dam Safety Division. They have one permanent employee right now. They have 2 limited service people. So we go from 1 permanent to 4 permanent. And we ask them to take on help them finish the rulemaking that they're engaged in right now, and then have more staffing capacity to get out in the field and do the inspecting that we know we need to do in order to live safely when these flooding events are around. Last is wetlands. That has a quieter piece. They are, a great natural sponge. Wetlands slow down water, hold water temporarily, and just calm the river down. So they are a great natural tool, and we've lost a lot of wetlands in the last since settling in Vermont. So these are long-term members. We lost about 1/3 of our wetlands, and the idea is to start regaining our wetlands. So there becomes a net policy to gain wetlands year by year. In fact, we're already doing that, but this codifies it. So that's what S213 is all about. And thanks for the opportunity to share about it.
Thank you, Senator Bray. And I'll just note, you're going to start to, if you have not already started here, there is dissension on this bill because it does make some big changes and very positive, thoughtfully considered changes that our committee spent a lot of time on. So there is going to be some tension you hear about the timeline. Is it too fast? Is it too slow? We spent a lot of time debating that, and the administration came in with some very high projected numbers on staffing needs and the cost of this type of program. So just be aware of that as you're starting to hear conversations, because I know that the rumor mill of the environmentalists not caring about people and their taxes can start very quickly. So just know that if you start to hear that information, we did spend a lot of time taking that under consideration. So
Its path is, sorry,
Yeah, go ahead.
it will probably make a stop in finance because Senator Watson brought forward a good idea to look at, are there ways through tax to, or easements, what's our toolkit for helping keep green spaces that are floodplain green spaces, helping them not be a burden to someone who thought, well, I would develop that. That's how I was going to maintain it. And we reduce the tax burden on that property in order to keep it a functional floodplain.
Yeah. So I saw some questions, let's 3, okay, Molly and then Scott, and then maybe one other person if they raise their hands. Go ahead, Molly.
Thanks for doing this, Bill. It's really important. I'm assuming that these regulations would overturn or supersede town zoning?
Yeah, so over time, the flood hazard area bylaws that towns have would be, towns are required to step up and move to the state standard that's being redefined, which is a little more protective of properties that are in flood areas.
Yeah, I can remember when my town was just trying to redo their zoning and people who lived along the brook were like complaining about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
I was just wondering about compare and contrast between floodplains and river corridors.
So you could, yes, rabbit hole on this one. There, it's, what I'm about to say is not always exactly true. But in general, the area in which a river will wander and stay, they meander, that's the term we hear all the time. And the space, the sort of the two edges of the meander zone is what they'll call a river corridor. And so that's an area where for sure that you're at risk of having something, undermined, whatever, in that area. And then once water is high enough that it then spreads outside that river corridor, then you're into the flood hazard or the floodplain. Now, actually, floodplain, FEMA's term of art is a flood hazard area, and that's the maps they draw that allow you to qualify. If you have bylaws for those areas, then your town can qualify for an flood insurance program.
If I may add to that, so flood hazard areas are at risk of particularly inundation flooding, which is like what we saw in downtown Montpelier, just waters rise. River corridor hazards are more erosionally based, so more like the landslides or riverbanks falling in that we saw in actually the majority of the rest of the state. Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounds interesting. It
If you-
sounds like an interesting rabbit hole.
Because if you want to get really nerdy on this topic, we had multiple experts come in and speak to us at length. And we will happily, you can find that testimony. if you'd like to see it. I saw Senator Harrison, and then we'll do one last person after her.
Yeah, I just, Senator White was talking about the cost of, the state taking over river corridors. And it's a relatively high number, but when you compare it to the amount of the damage, do we have a proportion so that you could say, every 10 years, if we had a flood this amount, it would surpass the cost? And obviously, and you can also say the damages from the most recent flood would have been less if we had. Corridor match.
Yeah, it'd be great. We don't have that kind of data.
But we could.
But we can work on it. The cost for the river corridor piece is roughly probably $2 million a year. And we just had $1 billion of damage from the flood this year. So it becomes a very small fraction. It's, to me, it seems as though if we can do it by the math, but I also feel like there's a moral obligation. When you see people in harm's way, repeatedly being damaged in ways that are in some cases irrecoverable, and we know how to do better, then we should step up and do the work on behalf of everyone.
Yeah, and we're talking 4.9 million is the protected amount for the bill with 16 full-time employees. We will probably see that number alter as it makes its way through some other committees, but that's where we're at compared to the $1 billion of cost. So one last question, and then we'll move on to 310.
Well, it's not a question, it's a follow-up that we had taken testimony on dams this week in our committee, and the Waterbury Dam is the most critical dam in the state of Vermont, in need in the entire state of Vermont. It needs concrete renovation because it's deteriorating, as concrete does when it's exposed to water. 3 floodgates are starting to fail. One is not working properly right now, the other 2. So these are the gates that release the water when it builds to a certain level at the dam. And actually, even the spillway, the stone in the spillway has started to deteriorate where the water is not going exactly where it should. So if I remember correctly, we're looking to the tune of $70 million in repairs on this one dam.
I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about dam safety, and if you have a need to be scared in your life, I highly recommend reviewing all of the information about our dams, because it is a very scary thought that we are not properly potentially regulating them at their safest point. So
they're rated by property damage versus human life risk and that sort of thing.
And we have in the bill, and as you may know, we have a senator from Washington who has heard a lot about this dam and the rights. There's lots of dams, and if you have one particularly that you're thinking about in your community that you feel a bill does not address, I'm really interested in that feedback. But we do have a request for the high hazard dams, to get a real handle on that and to prioritize those in the bill. And we have a revolving loan fund, because one of the things we heard was that dam owners want to do repairs, they want to do removal. They may not be able to afford to do it, so we have a revolving loan fund in there to help that.
It's also a power dam.
Yeah, if you.
Waterbury.
If you're sleeping too well and you want to get anxious, let us know. We'll tell you about a high hazard dam.
Yeah, right near you.
Your neighborhood.
There it is. We're going to talk about 310, S310. So natural resources has been focusing on the Senate side on obviously the natural resources, the flooding, inundation, fluvial, all of that science-based work that ANR does. The other side of it is, how did our government need to respond post-flooding? And how do we respond to natural disasters? And that's what Senate Government Operations has been doing. The bill is a combination of many bills and concepts. It starts with having a climate mitigation municipal grant fund. You may be familiar with that, with a bill on the House side that Catherine Sims had introduced, Representative Sims. It was an S-145 if you followed it coming over to the House side. We don't have a funding mechanism for this beautiful fund yet. We're going to leave that up to finance. The bill also includes updates to wastewater and utility formation.
Stormwater utilities. Very exciting stuff. Tucker Anderson has been helpful on that front. It is okay. It's fun for some people.
It also includes, we have Department of Public Works folks, your wastewater, your water, your plow folks. They're not considered first responders currently. And that was a request that we heard from DPW folks, was when they are in situations and you're experiencing flooding, they are first responders in many ways. And in fact, two of the folks who passed away during Irene, if you remember tragically in Rutland, were Department of Public Works folks, one an employee and one a son. So while they were responding to a flooding situation. So changing them to first responders, I think that's a good move. We've got lots of other things in the bill. I looked at Senator Watson.
I'm looking at the summary. So just some other highlights include shelter identification. You may be familiar with like reverse 911, where an alert is pushed out to you if you're in an area, but we did have VT alerts, but not exactly a reverse 911. And so looking at the possibility of using that is in there as well. There is also best management practices for rebuilding after an emergency, the creation of a urban search and rescue team. And there was a lot of information about affected people that was provided through 211, and I think there's some data privacy concerns around that. So it is kind of a hodgepodge of things, but there's a lot of important and good stuff in here.
Yeah.
So.
And we basically found that if you were in a community affected by flooding, you probably experienced something acute that really did impact you. And there are a lot of ways that we as a government can be more efficient in response to flooding. It's not a part of this bill, but I think a conversation that is relevant to this is regional government. One of the ways that FEMA works is they are typically used to working with counties. So we experienced the situation where FEMA was not working with counties, they were working with tiny towns. And a lot of times those towns didn't have the things that they needed to actually take advantage of the program as well as they could. So it's not in that bill, but we are looking at regional government as well. So Representative Williams, and then you've heard enough from the Senate today, so we can.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
Just a
We
comment.
can all go
that,
home.
That bill, 310, has many elements that are featured in the Flood Recovery Omnibus Bill 723 that many of you are familiar with. And both of these bills that the Senate has detailed are tracked in the spreadsheet that we mentioned.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you all for listening on the things that hopefully will be headed your way on the House side soon. And if you have questions, please come talk to any of us. We're happy to address them. So What was our last thing on?
That was it. Thank you so much. Do stay tuned because we are getting very close to our press conference. So stay tuned. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.